Do you think you're gonna hide all night from me?
What is someone
They'll get plenty of me.
Experiment.
Nice and slow. Get all that big picture in the back. Back up a little bit. Okay, that's good enough. The rest of it.
Hey, Layla.
Okay, now don't stop. So you can see the little pictures on the door. Stay there.
No, I have heard about you for years. Back when we were
I said, he wants you to let it go. And they did later.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
How are you doing?
Cousins and many cousins.
Emerson. Or right now? Anderson. But I don't think she...
It's all right. I missed the case.
I looked it all over and I said, well, I guess I lucked out.
stories about John, just remember there are young children present, and you must be appropriate. But the first thing I would like to read is from John's youngest sister, Bonnie, who happens to be my boss. So she made me do this. But these are her remembrances. John Foxy Souders. Does that nickname suit him or what? The definition of Foxy is sly, cunning, two perfect adjectives to describe him, along with other words like fun-loving, prankster, son, husband, father, uncle, cousin, athlete, teacher, counselor, fisherman, friend, loyal friend, charismatic chick magnet. Even when he was in the hospital, the nurses, especially the younger ones, the good-looking ones, were surrounding him and doting on him. Unbelievable. I said to him, I don't get it. You are nothing but an old bag of bones, and these women can't stay away from you. He smiled and gave me that crooked grin and said, I've still got it. He surrounded himself with the people who made him happy and those who he made happy. He loved his life, and he lived it by his own rules. The Lord knows that's true. He left his mark on many throughout his life, and he will be remembered in many different ways. I think that what John wanted most was for everyone to smile and feel happy whenever they think of him. That will be how I spend great moments, thinking about John, smiling and happy. What a guy. So that was Ben. The next was co-written by John's daughters, and unfortunately, John's desire to have a celebration of life here, and that was his wish. We couldn't really get a date other than tonight. And unfortunately, both of his daughters had commitments. One is walking as we speak across England, for example, on a hike with her family. But they did write a note that I want to read for you. Dearest Dad, as we sit to write about the many things we want to remember about you and about the ways we will hold you in our minds and hearts, we have the unique perspective to recognize the impact you had on us as our dad. We find it most important to acknowledge that our children are still growing, and these things are theirs through us. We wholly acknowledge that your legacy continues from generation to generation, from us to them. These are some of the ways that we will remember you. We remember the times you tickled our toes and tummy until we, of course we did, peed our pants and cried for you to stop, but really hoped you never would. We remember when you dragged us around the house in a blanket as if we were the toys and you were Santa Claus. We remember the Little League team you integrated in 1974 so that we could play. We were terrible and it frustrated the hell out of you, but you continued to encourage us through the season. You were probably as happy as we were when it ended. That season and many other times you taught us not to be quitters. If you commit to something, then you follow through. Nature was your home and you made it ours. We remember being given headlamps to help you pick up night crawlers in the dark after a good rain in the summer. We are not afraid of bugs or creepy crawly things, and we attribute that to you. We have thought of you with pride when picking up our children from nature camps as they present us with the ball of slug collected after a washout of an afternoon. We remember stopping by the side of the road when an animal was suffering and you doing the right thing to put it out of its misery. If it was a deer, We also remember you slicing off the tail and taking it home. Then preparing it and dyeing it with red dye on the stove, which was much to our mother's chagrin. And finally, it was ready for you to make fishing jigs in your basement workshop, the original man cave. We remember spending the day sunbathing on Glimmerglass Lake while you whistled and patiently awaited a bite at the end of your fishing line. We remember the meticulousness with which you did everything in the yard of our childhood home. You raked away every stone from the yard and planted every seed of grass. Our love of puttering around came from tailing behind you for hours. You would even take the time to look for four-leaf clovers with us. You always found one. We never did. We remember 5-hour Monopoly games on rainy days. You were always the banker and kept us from cheating. One marathon game lasted almost 2 weeks while we were vacationing on some godforsaken remote lake in Canada. We had to use an outhouse and wash in the cold lake, but we did just fine with a bar of soap and a clean towel. We loved every minute of living the simpler life together, and we did so because of your enthusiasm. You wore a Jewish tie around your neck, or the insignia to acknowledge life in Hebrew. Our mother gave it to you, but you wore it to support us, to say it's okay that my girls are Jewish. There were times you drove us to Hebrew school. This couldn't have been easy for you, who grew up in a family with a strong Christian heritage. You publicly stood up for us when you heard anti-Semitic rhetoric more than once. Community was your home, too. We remember you always looking out for disabled men, women, and children. You gave them dignity and friendship. You volunteered to mow their lawns. You took them fishing. You captured their runaway animals and made sure we did the same. Our home was a refuge to people. And once we were in your high school, we saw that your office was a refuge as well. You were the definition of young at heart. Nothing gave you more joy than a good joke or funny prank. Your wit was both famous and infamous. You never missed the opportunity to throw out a one-liner, and you took deep pleasure in humor. You taught us how to relax and not take life too seriously. We can remember countless jokes and pranks. What comes to mind is you're standing on your back porch, shouting back and forth with your friends, our neighbors on either side, your favorite quote from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. For all those wonderful memories and for so many more, we love you. We will remember you always and forever. Thanks for all of the love, friendship, jokes, and laughter, even if at times you could be a bit inappropriate. That's for Tricia and Karen. And again, this is a celebration of life, so we don't want any downers. John would want us to be happy and party. I think he might be shouting brazos on occasion. But if anyone would like to come up and make any comments, I'd invite you now. If not, anybody want?
He says, hold it relatively close. Is this relatively?
Yep.
Many of you know that before there was Oxford, there was Gville, good old little Gilbersville. I have the fortune to be one of the Toby kids. And the Souders, when we were younger, had many good days with the Toby kids. Yes, this isn't John, but Bonnie and I were in the class of '66 from Gilbertsville, and she left us. John, alias Foxy, and my oldest brother, John, palled around quite often. We had the Toby farm. As you have heard, John loved the outdoors. He loved carousing with the fish poles in Camp Dingrod. Raw frog's eggs and staying in the old chicken coop, which he named Camp Dingrod, which I never knew until I text my oldest brother that Foxy had passed on to greener pastures. And I said, he still to the final days was telling Camp Dingrod and Jeeville stories, along with thousands of others, including his camp. But just to go backwards, I hadn't seen John, alias Foxy, probably for 8 or 9 years. I had the honor of going for an interview at Unitigo. It was just one of those flukes. I got a phone call thinking I'll never hear from them. Janet Eckler saying, you called about whether there was any openings in business. They had 12 openings that year. I went in. Russ Saratka, the principal, was on vacation, never had a clue that there was a business opening. That had happened after he left. And he was on a much needed break from interview to more interviews. I walk in, Janet took me in, introduced me to the guidance secretary, asked me a couple of questions, make myself comfortable. All of a sudden I hear, oh my God, is that little Annie Toby out there? And I'm going, oh my God, please Foxy, don't embarrass me now. John comes around the corner from his cubicle, gives me a bear hug, oh my, almost like that jump up and down type. And I'm going, okay, Ann, and I'm going, John, how are you? I haven't seen you. John, it's Foxy. I said, yeah. And so we're talking for a minute. Russ comes out of his office right next door, and John says, Russ, Annie tells me she's coming for an interview for the business department. I don't care who you've got coming in. Give it to her. I used to change her diapers. Clean enough for you?
That's beautiful.
I won't go on to the many more. You can imagine life with knowing John back here and the stories that he had, and love him many, many more. And John, from all the Toby kids, keep throwing that line in.
Anyone else? Oh. How did I know?
There are children present. All the kids may be excused now. All the children. I'm not being excused. I'm crossing from the
I don't really know where to start. I met John Fox Souders, I guess 56
Spencer.
years ago now. 56 years ago, on the way to Parsons
The
College
volume.
in Fairfield, Iowa. John was I met. I was coming from North Jersey, and I took the train from North Jersey to Chicago. At which time I had to change trains, and I sat down across the aisle from this funny-looking guy who was reading The Carpetbagger. Turned out to be John Souders. We left Chicago, and he kept staring at me the whole way, and I kept staring back at him, and I'm thinking, geez, what's with this guy with the Carpetbagger? he later told me he kept looking at me thinking that I was gay. So I didn't. He later found out I was not. I was not. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But anyway, we get out to Parsons in Fairfield, and my gosh, the room assignments came. And of all people, I'm ribbing with John Souders, Foxy. Now, I'm a pretty young kid, and John has already been to college 3 different times, 3 different colleges. Now he's on number 3, and I'm number 1, and I'm almost a virgin at this point. I'm pretty young, almost a virgin. And he sort of kind of took me under his wing. John, we all know John. We know that little twinkle in his eye and all those mischievous things that he used to do. And he taught me quite a few of them. My wife told me I better think about some things to say for the last month, and I haven't thought of any of them because I wasn't sure that we were going to actually do this. So I'm sort of freewheeling it here. One time, John, we were in the dorm room, and John was being annoyed by this horsefly that was running around. And he finally grabbed the horsefly and he said, "VD." Oh, that's the other thing. My name is Van Dyke, and John immediately started calling me VD. Now, I was so young I hardly knew what the hell VD was. But anyway, he said, "Grab this horsefly." He said, "Get this thing by the wings." And he took that horsefly and he took a piece of needle and thread. He took the thread and he tied it around the head of this horsefly, and he put a thumbtack in the desk, and he watched this horsefly fly around like, what is wrong with this guy? But anyway, while at Parsons, I was only there 2 trimesters. I didn't last very long. John taught me quite a few things, and we did an awful lot of partying, and he taught me how to party, and we had a great time. But anyway, we became very, very close friends. I always considered him my best friend, other than my wife. He was the best man in my wedding. I was the best man in one of his weddings. My wife and I would go up and visit with him several times a year, always at Memorial Day, and I'd bring my kids up there to camp, and my kids were pretty young when we first started going up, and we live in North Jersey. We don't live up here. And some of the things you folks do up here, we just don't do down in Jersey. So I had to get my kids aside at the end of the long partying weekend and deprogram the children. We really had to get them back in line so we could go back home. I'm trying to think of some of the other stories. John would often call me, and many times there was a message on the message machine back in those days. And one particularly funny message I can recall. I'm sure I've told several of you this one already, but he would call and he didn't know that I wasn't home. But as soon as the answering machine picked up, he immediately came up with a story, and it was always something funnier than hell. And one of them that really just tickles me, and I always remember it, is, he said, "David," he was having back problems. He said, "David," he says, "I've got some good news and I've got some bad news." He said, "The bad news is that I'm going to be in a full body cast for 6 months. But," he said, "the good news is I'm going to save $53 from Geico from my insurance." He said it a little bit funnier than that, but anyway, it was something that always got me. We just had a wonderful time. coming up here it's sad, because whenever we came up, he'd always call. He'd say, "Now you're coming up, right? You're coming up." You know, it was the day before, or as we were driving up Route 17 in our little motorhome, he'd always call and say, "You know, you're coming up, coming up." And when we came up last night, I didn't get that call, so I miss him. But I'm going to see him on the other side. So.
Anybody else?
Hey, ready with the volume. It might be different.
Hello, my name is Rod Gold, and I have a story that's similar to Ann's, except it's a little bit of a twist. And that is, I graduated and grew up and graduated from South Remebering, and my high school guidance counselor, her name was Gloria Hendricks. And so, lo and behold, 4 years later, after I graduated and got my degree, I came to Unitigo, and lo and behold, it was Gloria, not John, that greeted me. So here we are these many years later. Thank you, Gloria. I immediately, when I came to Unitigo, John and I became friends very, very quickly. He had a profound influence on me immediately. I wouldn't say it was always good, but we had a great time. We had the same interest in hunting and fishing. And the thing that I absolutely loved about John was his ability to be so creative in his practical jokes. I've never seen anyone that could just on the fly make them up. So I'm going to tell you one, and then I'll finish. I know there's a lot of people that want to talk. We loved to ice fish, and so we were on Shenango Lake, and at this point, this one time, John was going to invite along a friend of his. He was vice president of a local bank around here. I hope he's not here. But he invited him along. He'd never been ice fishing before. And so, John, being John, we get him out on the ice, and this man says, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, you take this auger and you drill a hole." So the guy drills a hole and gets the hole down through the ice. And the guy says, "What do you do next?" And he said, "Well, just take the skimmer and you skim out all the ice." And he said, "Okay." So he gets all the ice out, and the guy grabs a pole and starts to drop the line, and John says, "No, you're not done yet." He says, "Well, what do I have to do next?" And he said, "Well, you have to bail all the water out of the hole until it gets down to the bottom of the ice." I'm not kidding. I'm serious. So the guy looks at him, he finally says, "Well, what do you use?" Well, John said, "Well, top of your thermos will work just fine." God's honest truth, the guy takes the top of his thermos and he starts bailing water. It was after about, I would say, 15, 20 seconds or so, this vice president of the bank, who I'm sure is no longer a president or vice president, heard the laughing, turned around. I won't tell you what he said at John, but he did throw the top of the thermos at him, and walked away. God's honest truth. We have witnesses. Thank you. I love the man dearly. I hadn't seen John in many years, but we did get together last year. We went down to visit with Al Patel, and it was great to relive old memories. And boy, did we ever. A tremendous man and a tremendous friend. Thank you.
Spencer.
Do we have other takers? Don't let it be, great, come on up. Don't let it be something where you get home and say, "Boy, I wish I just told that one
Start your
story."
video.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Patel, and I met John back in 1977. John and Gloria hired me at Unitigo as their guidance secretary. And I had been working at the First National Bank in Sydney, as a bookkeeper teller at the time. And they had already offered me the job, and I had already told the people at the bank that I would be leaving. And I said, but God, you gotta see this guy that hired me. He is so cute. So I didn't know John from Adam, but all of us are looking out the window. There was this big picture window upstairs of the First National Bank in Sydney. He pulls up, gets out of the car. I said, here he is, here he is. Everybody comes running to the window. They said, oh my God, he is good looking. Next thing you know, the other door opened and out comes his wife. Oh my God, he's married. But anyway, that was one of the first times I met John, and I was at Unitigo for 3 years and got a big and better offer to go to Bendix at the time, and I left Unitigo. And I was miserable. Bendix was just not the place for me. And I can remember calling John, and I said, John, I want my job back. Can I come back? And he said, Judy, we already hired somebody. He says, I can't just tell her we just can't tell her that she's not here anymore. I said, okay. I said, but if there comes an opportunity, I'd like to come back. Well, lo and behold, about a year later, Russ Rathka, the principal, fired his secretary. We won't say why. But he called me and said, how would you like to come back to Unitigo? And I was there for 37 years. So it was the best decision I ever made. So John made it so enjoyable to go to work every day. We laughed so many times. He was the ultimate prankster. And I'm just going to share a couple stories because there's so many working with John that he just was just so much fun to be around. And one in particular, Carol Peterson was the gal that took my place. When I left in the guidance office, I came back as the high school secretary, but Carol, one day she comes out to my desk and she says, Judy, I need you to come in the bathroom. I said, why, what's going on? She goes, I just need you to come in the bathroom. So I said, okay. So I go in the bathroom and I'm looking around. I said, well, I don't see anything. She goes, close the door. So I close the door. There's this huge picture of John's face on the back of the door. So I immediately started laughing. I said, she goes, I can't go to the bathroom with him looking at me. I said, Carol, it's just a picture. She goes, I don't care. I can't have him looking at me. So I take the picture down and throw it away. I said, okay, there you go. So that's one story. Another time, John was really good friends with all the recruiters that came to Unitigo, and we went through a lot of service recruiters. But one day in particular, but I got to start at the beginning of the story first. John, who owned the camp on the Susquehanna, acquired that camp through a gentleman named Stuart Searles. Stuart had a wooden leg. When Stuart passed away, he left the camp to John. They were just best buddies, and John got this camp, and John took that wooden leg that Stuart had and had it hanging on the garage of his camp for years. That was his tribute to Stuart. So one day, John gets a call at school from the attorney of Stuart's wife. Stuart's wife had passed away. So the attorney says to John, Vivian has passed away, and she has it in her will that when she passes away, you're to go to her house and get her dog and have the dog put down, because the dog is to be buried with her. So John tells us at school, I gotta go get the dog, have the dog put down. And so he leaves school, has it done, comes back, gets a call from the attorney. John, don't put the dog down, Vivian didn't die. And we said, he goes, what? I already did it. So they had revived her in the ambulance. So lo and behold, Vivian did eventually pass away just a day or so later. But John had in the back of his truck this casket with the dog in it. And one of the recruiters comes, and they're walking outside, and the recruiter says to John, "John, what's that box in the back of your truck?" And John goes, "Oh, that's Nick." He goes, "Nick?" He goes, "Yeah, that's my buddy Nick." He goes, "What do you mean, your buddy Nick?"
Quit. Shut
Well,
down.
my buddy Nick passed away, and he wanted to be buried down at camp under the tree, and I told him I'd do it for him. And the recruiter goes, "John, you can't do that." He goes, "Sure I can. That's what he wanted, and that's what I'm going to do." Well, then he finally told him, Nick is the dog. So, but there's so many stories that I could share with you, and I'm sure all of us from Unitigo could share. But John became one of my very, very best friends, and we did a lot together. Him and my husband and Al went fishing and hunting with John on numerous occasions. And John was just, if you needed somebody to pick you up, he was there. And as much as John was a jokester, he would do anything for you if you asked him. And he was there for me on numerous occasions, for when my son was born prematurely, and now my husband has Alzheimer's. And John was there for me and would come up and see me, and I'm going to miss him a tremendous amount. I love John dearly, and I will never forget when I got hired at Unitigo and all the fun times we had. Thank you.
Anyone else? Here we go. I've got a lot of stories too, but I have grandchildren here.
Attorney-client privilege.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Noni Slaughter, and I'm from Gilbertsville.
Hey.
And John was one of my first boyfriends. We held hands at the movies on Saturday night, and then he walked me home, and my brothers didn't even lock me in the bathroom and tell him that I'd gone to Oneonta with my mother, which they did with Gordon Brannick instead. In eighth grade, my family moved to Maine for a year, and that was the summer that John and I were finding little niches in the buildings where we could sneak in, and nobody would see us. We'd be in the shadows, and we would kiss. Oh, it was heaven. But I asked him, I said, "I'm going to be in Maine. That's a long ways away. We won't see each other until next year." And I said, "Will you write to me?" "Oh, yes, I will write to you. I'll write to you every week." Well, I never got a letter. But I got a lot of letters from Butch Breslin instead. So when I came back the next year, Butch was my boyfriend. Foxy was no longer my boyfriend. And he went on to other friends. And when I moved back to Gilbertsville in 1981. John was one of my first callers. Came over and we had coffee, and then we had wine, and then we sat on the couch, and the spark was gone. I don't know what happened. You know, that was a long time, between 54 and 81. That's a long time. We'd both seen a lot of miles. But he was an amazing guidance counselor. I took both of my kids to him when they got ready to go to college, and he pointed them in the right direction. And a young friend of my daughter's, who was working at the box factory, I said, "Sherry, you really want to work at the box factory forever?" She said, "No, I want to go to college and learn how to be a photographer." Took her over to John. He helped her do her SATs, and got her pointed in the right direction, and she still takes really good pictures. Yeah. Well, he was a dear, dear friend, and warms my heart to think of all those wonderful times we had together. Thank you.
Thank you, Noni. I'm reluctant to ask for just people who may have dated John. We haven't got quite that much time. But, anyone else? Well, I'm sure John would want you to have a great time. If we're all set, we appreciate, the whole family appreciates, and Julie appreciates everyone turning out to show our respect and just to remember one of the greatest guys ever, boxing.